Hi everybody, tonight we're going to talk about oligopoly in practice. I will tell you up front, this is a section that is not really meaty. We'll talk here about some policy things. There are a couple of vocabulary terms to know, but this is not a really meaty section, so this will be a quick video. First of all, let's remember that explicit cartel collusion is uncommon today, largely because of legislation and laws, things like the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890. You don't need to know anything more about the Sherman Antitrust Act than this. Just know that that is what makes oligopoly, makes collusion hard to carry out in the U.S. Modern economies have this kind of stuff in place, and it makes it hard for oligopolies to act like monopolies, and makes it difficult for monopolies to form in the first place. So even though there are cases where tacit collusion can happen, and you remember the definition of tacit collusion from today, where we are not actually colluding by talking to one another directly, but tacitly through our actions and our signaling, we as duopolists or oligopolists are in a position where we can actually signal in a way to raise prices, lower costs, do other things like that. Now, that having been said, in the real world, there are market characteristics that largely keep tacit collusion from happening. Makes it very, very difficult for collusion to happen. The first reason, and there are 5 listed here, the first is merely large numbers. Tacit collusion requires that the participants get it and are willing to practice it. They understand that if everyone keeps the price high, all firms benefit. But there are many firms, when there are many firms, some might not understand what's going on. They may be either new entrants to the market or early entrants who've changed their mind. That means that it's much easier for firms to cheat on these agreements, and it's very hard to detect them in that case when there are many players in a market. Second is, many industries have really complex products and complex pricing schemes. Even when we talked about companies like Verizon and AT&T, where we talked today about the fact that there are some markets where Verizon dominates, such as in the Northeast. There's some markets where AT&T dominates, like in much of the South, especially around central and southern central Texas. They absolutely dominate the market. But in places like Denver, in places like San Francisco, in places like Chicago, where there is true duopoly power going on there, tacit collusion is really hard, largely because their products are so complex. Think about cell phone plans, texting plans, data plans. On top of that, throw in landline and DSL charges and other TV charges. So AT&T has a product called Uverse, and Verizon has a product called, I don't remember what it's called. But those deliver TV. So the products and their pricing are very complex, and it would literally be hard for the competitors to keep up with each other and also to keep track of all the signaling that's going on. So that product complexity is inherently working against the idea of tacit collusion happening. The third is difference in interests among the parties. So in order for tacit collusion to happen, people have to agree, the players have to agree on some sort of direct or indirect goal. Should prices be at a certain level, higher or lower? There may be disagreement about that. They might not even operate in the same regions, and they may have different ideas about regional market share. They don't all have the same agreements with their labor unions. They don't all have the same agreements with their suppliers. So their costs, when you think about break-even costs, as producers, they may have very different interests in the way they price because their costs are different. So that's another way that tacit collusion, another thing that keeps tacit collusion from happening easily. The fourth is bargaining power of buyers. Lots of products are sold to a retailer who in turn sells the product to the consumer. Think of groceries being sold into places like Kroger, Safeway, Walmart, and then those guys turn around and sell them to consumers. Well, when that buyer has significant market power, take Walmart for example, it's really hard for two companies to collude in setting prices to Walmart when Walmart has that much power. Walmart actually ends up playing producers or manufacturers off of each other. I remember my time at Procter & Gamble, a great case where our salespeople were in trying to sell more Jif peanut butter to Walmart, but they were trying to get a price increase. And the head buyer of peanut butter at Walmart said, you know, I think we buy peanut butter from you by the trainload. And what do you think would happen if we just stopped buying from you? Now, that is a very, very clear signal. That buyer could very easily stop buying Jif, pick up the phone, and tell the people at Skippy to make up the difference. Now, would he have actually done it? Who knows? The signal that was sent is, I, as the buyer, have more bargaining power than you, the producer. And our guys walked out, tail between their legs, without the price increase from Walmart. The last is product differentiation and price leadership. So product differentiation is a classic way, and we've talked about this already, to make your product look better to the consumer. And even though it's not different, it may not do really different things, you differentiate your product in order to charge a higher price. So think about the market for shoes. Nike versus Adidas versus Reebok versus Saucony versus whatever your brand is, your favorite brand is. When you think about it, the mechanics and the technology in a pair of running shoes, for example, if you're comparing 5 different running shoes, they aren't that different. We each have our preferences for different, very small differences in the products. If that's the case, if you're in a very differentiated market, it's very hard for producers to collude tacitly, because it's hard to send price signals and get everybody to increase prices, because we as consumers have different preferences within that product segment. Price leadership is an interesting idea, because a price leader is someone in an industry, a firm rather, that sets a price and rival firms will follow it. Now we're getting into price leadership being an example where you actually have somebody with enough power and influence that they can determine market price. They set the price first and everybody else colludes tacitly by following them. The best example, and I know I use it a lot, is airlines, where they will signal by increasing prices in one market and they will wait to see if everybody else follows. They'll start charging for bags and they'll wait to see if everybody else follows. So that's pretty much it when it comes to discussion of oligopoly in practice and why tacit collusion doesn't happen more often. The fact of the matter is, in the real world, it's really, really hard for companies to collude collude tacitly at any really sustainable level. Key concepts for this module. Let's quickly crank those out. You can pause here if you'd like. Remember the Sherman Antitrust Act. Remember that all oligopolists can tacitly collude if there are a few firms, if the products are simple, if the interests of the buyers are, the interests of the producers are similar, and if the buyers don't have much bargaining power. Remember that firms in oligopolies often compete by differentiating their products in order to price higher. Remember that if you have a price leader, tacit collusion will result, as other firms set prices based on what that price leader does. And remember also that even if firms don't compete on the basis of price, they may compete in other areas. They may compete for service. They may compete on the basis of just simply what they produce, and that makes it harder for similar companies to get together and collude with them. All right, that's it. Have a great evening. I'll see you tomorrow.